And I think we are live. Love, peace, and power, everybody. My name is Kilel Kiano, aka Konami Codes. Welcome to the Mystery Arcade Occult Multiversity. Thank you for joining me yet again. We have one of my absolute favorite people in the world. I truly look at this man as a mentor and a big brother who has always been open about sharing his thoughts and sharing his own interpretations, but always driving forth the primary tenet of knowing your own mind and what's yours and what's outside of it. The professor, Michael Bell, thank you for joining me again, brother. It is a true honor to have you back. How are you feeling?
Oh man, fantastic, fantastic. I woke up to talk about it, so I don't have no complaints.
That's what I'm talking about. Greatly appreciate that, man. It is wonderful to see you. I've been very hyped for this conversation because Star Trek is a deep-seated passion. I feel for a great many of us, especially in the occult, like we were just actually talking about before we started. To a large degree, there's a lot of people who may not understand why they love Star Trek or why they're drawn to it in such a way. And it has such a rich history, no matter what you're looking at, whether you're looking at series, whether you're looking at the movies, the different iterations of the Enterprise and other ships, captains. Uh, Tell us a little bit about some of your motivations, some of your love for Star Trek, if you would.
I thank you. And before I get in, I want to say thank you for that outstanding introduction. And I want to say the same applies for me towards you because we have been rocking on this this internet, this social media platform. We've been rocking for a while and for years. And I can honestly say I've said it before that I do believe that I'm a proponent of reincarnation, and I feel that all of us were in the ethers, and we decided that we was gonna come back right now, and we were gonna make it fun. We said, you know what, the internet, this thing called the internet, is gonna be out, and we're gonna find each other through this medium, and that's what we did. But thank you because you drop a lot of timely knowledge. You look at me as a mentor. I'm definitely one of your students, so I just want to say that. But in terms of Star Trek and my love, I'll say this: most of the things that we're passionate about, it's kind of like religion. We kind of got it from our mother, grandmother, somebody we trusted, a mentor. So for me, my love of Star Trek, um, my mother was a single black woman and she raised four kids on her own. But for some reason, she loved Star Trek, and so one of the few time my earliest memories of Star Trek, it was the original Captain Kirk series. It was in reruns, of course. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough that me and my mother would sit on the couch. I would curl up next to my mom, and she thoroughly enjoyed science fiction. We would watch Captain Kirk. We would watch it on reruns, and so that was my introduction. And then, of course, for those who follow Star Trek, for years there was nothing else other than the movies, and the same crew: Kirk, Uhura, Sulu, Scotty, Beam Me Up, Dr. McCoy. Damn it, Jim, I'm a doctor, not a metaphysician. But and believe it or not, even as I was older, I was a teenager when the Next Generation series came out. But at the time when that came out, I was active. I was out, I was a teenager. I was in the streets and I was hanging out, doing my thing. And my mom said, you got to come home and be sure you're home tonight. We're going to watch this new Star Trek series. And I had no idea about it. And so for me, it was a way, as teenagers, we tend to disconnect with our parents. And so for me, Star Trek was a way for me to reconnect with my mom, at that teenage stage. And so uh with that series, when the Next Generation came out, um I didn't just reconnect with my mom. Something inside me stirred. and I realized just how much I loved Star Trek. But even then, I'll be honest to say, as a teenager, I had no idea why I was so passionate about Star Trek, because you got to understand that at this time, especially from when the original Star Trek came out to when Next Generation, in that gap, we have Star Wars. And so Star Wars was more of a religion for me. And later we can talk about it. But Star Wars is something that I still hold in a whole different section of the Star Wars is blatantly metaphysical and occult and things like that. So just to stick to the topic, I knew I liked Star Trek. I just didn't know why. And so TNG, when Next Generation came out, that was so critical because it began to explain the why. And now, mind you, and around this same time, well, I won't say around the same time, but within, I'm going to say, maybe 7 years of the Next Generation came out, which was in the I want to say the late 80s or early 90s, I got introduced to Bobby. I started getting turned on to Bobby and the things that helped me to connect more dots. But overall, my main passion for writing this book, and I was saying this, I'm gonna back up a little bit. Well, not back up, I'm gonna actually go forward. I was saying before we went on live that this book, The Metaphysics of Star Trek, it was birthed in 2008, I want to say, late 2008, early 2009. I actually had wrote a book called Star Trek on Leadership in Life. Now, I've always been a reader. 48 Laws of Power has been one of my like go-to books, especially at a younger age. I was introduced to the 48 Laws of Power, I want to say like around 92. And I'll tell a brief story. Bill Clinton was running for president, I believe. Yeah, Bill Clinton, I think, was running for president. He was asked on MTV, what's the two books on your nightstand? And he said, 48 Laws of Power and Devil Wears a Blue Dress. I've always been a reader. Back then, we didn't have the internet like we do. I went out and bought those two books. And so when I began the original version of the Star Trek book, which was Star Trek on Leadership and Life, I strove to write it in the same format as the 48 Laws of Power. So I just wanted to show how, because in life, I began to emulate these captains and scenarios, because you always envision yourself as the captain, as the, you are the protagonist of your own story. And so I found that when I found myself in unknown situations where the captain of a Starfleet vessel is in unknown territory, you realize that the captain has to have answers. He has to have a plan, even if he doesn't have a full plan. So things like that. So the original concept, it was just a book on leadership in life. And so I was pointing out how certain instances in Star Trek, from certain episodes, it applied to either leadership or just life. And then some kind of coalesced into both leadership and life. And so I wrote that book, but then something in me just said, it ain't ready. This ain't it. And so during that same period, I began to do the hard work, the real work. Like I said, some years later, prior to me writing that book, I got deep into Bobby and Panic. And that's when I realized that I wasn't actually doing the work. And so once I began to do the work and do the research, something clicked, and I said, I finally understand why I like Star Trek so much. It was for the metaphysical concepts and something that you're really good at, which is the gematria. You constantly hear these numbers in Star Trek. You hear these locations, Omicron Theta. You would just hear all these different little terms, and they kind of tickled the back of your mind. And so what I realized is that, number one, we have to accept that we're all ancient beings. And so certain metaphysical truths are just embedded in our DNA. And so when we hear certain things, you're gonna gravitate towards it. You're gonna be interested. So some people say, well, I don't watch sci-fi. I'm not into sci-fi. There's only one story to be told. Only one story. Now, whether you set that story in outer space, whether you set it in the household with a single mother, or whether it's a Western, whatever it is, there's only one story to be told. And so the only adaptability is how that story is told, and the how is similar to why we have so many different religions. So if you grew up where in a desert area where there's not a lot of water, then you get a religion like Islam. When you grow up somewhere where there's a lot of water, let's say that's like it would be like the Hawaiian pantheon where you're locked on an island surrounded by water. So that's why you get these different kind of shows, because we all gravitate towards different things that attract us on an unconscious or subconscious level. But I don't know. So I don't know from here. I don't know if you got a question for me, or if you want me to dive straight in. Let me know, and I'll do it.
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank you for everything that you said. I greatly appreciate those compliments. I do my best, but you have been again, like your company, you've been a literal pillar. Um, that, I've always been able to count on, so I want to thank you for that. Um, I'll see you and raise you, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll see where this leads us. Um, I completely identify with what you say about your love of Star Trek, especially in terms of your mother, because it was my mother who introduced me to Star Trek, and
Mm-hmm.
she absolutely loved it because my mother was interested. She was a what I used to call, long before conscious was ever a thing. I used to call her a conscious Christian,
Hmm.
because she was very much about Jesus and her religion, but she was very much about information and knowledge. She was also a Virgo. Um, she loved the original Star Trek, and one moment she always revisited was when um, Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura kiss. There was the first interracial kiss on television.
Uh-huh.
That was very big for her. She was a young adult at that time, and Martin Luther King Jr. had actually talked to Michelle Nichols because she was actually going to quit the show because of racism. He actually talked her back into staying on the show, becoming staying that iconic figure. Um, I know we all have our favorite iterations of Star Trek. My personal favorite. Um, I've always had a war between Star Trek: The Next Generation and Star Trek: Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek: Deep Space Nine holds a special place in my heart because and rising power to my mother Doris Barnett. Um, we found a way to kind of come back together. Not that we were ever really apart, but the first television show she introduced me to that I fell in love with was A Man Called Hawk,
Mm-hmm.
uh, starring
Amen.
Avery Brooks. You know what I mean? So when we saw him as Captain or Commander Benjamin Sisko, because he didn't start out as a captain. I need to make that clear for Star Trek fans know this. You know what I'm saying? But if you knew, if you never really paid attention to that iteration, Captain or Commander Benjamin Sisko started off as a commander of a space station on something new that Star Trek had never done. They had a space station next to a wormhole so
Yeah.
they could study it. That premise alone had me locked. But when I found out that the commander was him, we both lost our minds because it was something that we were both glued to. Um, can you speak about your favorite captain, perhaps your favorite iteration of Star Trek?
Okay, I will. And I want to say this first. When you mentioned that your mom introduced me, that touched me because that shows the power. Like I said, most of us, what we like, the things we're passionate about, it was introduced to somebody in the same vein as religion. And we usually tend to be protective of those things because of who introduced us to us. So that's why when you talk to somebody who's a diehard Christian and you tell them Jesus is not real, they'll get offended because you're not talking about Jesus. You're actually talking about their mom, their grandma. But I want to say this. My mom was a Libra. And one thing that I do point out in the book, I'm going to get to the topic, what the question you asked me, but I want to drop this. One thing I drop in my book is that the zodiac sign associated with technology, Star Trek is about technology bringing harmony and balance to all known creation. Well, the zodiac that represents technology, and most never thought about this, is Libra, because Libra is the only zodiac that is a machine. Everything else is an animal or a human hybrid of an animal. Libra is the only machine. So Libra is the zodiac sign for technology. So I'm dropping that for those who want to do the advanced work, and you can apply that to anything you do in terms of technology, this current fear that we have of AI and things like that. Now, my favorite captains, hands down, is Benjamin Sisko. Even though I was raised on Kirk, I love the karate chops and the Vulcan neck pitches, and we know that the red shirts are gonna die. But it's gonna be, for me, it's gonna be Benjamin Sisko, and I say that as a person who has watched every series, every movie. I've read the comics. I stay on what is it, the website Star Trek Alpha, but I say it's Cisco because, and this is another thing I drop in the book. When Roddenberry began the Star Trek universe, his goal was, number one, he wanted a Western in space, which is why Kirk and them always went to a different location and dealt with a different problem. It was going to be a Western in space. But the other thing was he wanted the future to be devoid of religion. He wanted technology and logic to be the guiding principles, not religion. And I found it ironic that, and Gene Roddenberry was still alive when DS9 came out. I found it ironic that when they decided to interject spirituality, who did they choose? A man named Hawk. They chose a black man. And very soon into that series, he became the emissary, a religious icon, like the prophet Muhammad. He became the embodiment of balancing life with spirituality. And not only that, he was the first commander slash captain, because he eventually became a captain, but he was the first leader on a Star Trek series that had a child that he interacted with, that he raised as a strong single black man. If you think about it, Kirk had a son. He was an absentee dad. McCoy had a daughter. They were somehow disconnected. All these Star Trek people, they chose to put their careers above family. Cisco was the first to not only be active but to maintain. Now, there's a huge joke online about how Worf is this horrible father, and we know that Worf is a brother, not only just as an actor, but we know that Klingons, period, are portrayed as being melanated. So the joke is that Worf was a horrible father. And you see it in the episodes. He rarely talks about his son. He's very rigid. He puts career above everything else. With Cisco, in the very first episode, we saw the love and the passion that he had for his wife, and that's what soured him towards then the captain everybody loved, which was Jean-Luc Picard, and it was so hard for him to veil his aggression towards this dude. Like, man, because of you, I lost the love of my life. And so for me, it was Cisco, just in the fact that, number one, I got to see somebody look like me, and like you said, I knew him from Hawk, and I just found it very poetical when you finally dig deep into the series. And so again, he's the commander of a space station. Up until this point, every Starfleet captain was on the go. He was locked in. He wasn't going nowhere. However, soon discovered that there was a wormhole. Now, that wormhole really represented nothing but the pineal gland. Because again, I said this before we came online, but I want to drop it now. If those who like science fiction, anything set in outer space is dealing with your mind. Now they say that space is vast and it's really empty, but we know that it's not. This is in reference to the mind. Most people, their mind is vast and empty. They're not exploring any deeper concepts. They're not battling any inner demons. Uh, Space is just space. Some people are comfortable with the idea that the only life that exists is here on Earth. So Star Trek kind of confronted that idea. So what I realized early on was that if we're exploring the depths of the mind, then any alien species that they ran into, these are just alien thoughts. These are concepts and ideas that we're not comfortable dealing with. And that's why I think that Starfleet as an entity is the perfect model because if you think about it, the whole concept of Starfleet is you may be an enemy today. I may not understand you. I may not get along with you. I'm talking about thoughts and ideas and things like that. However, if I stay true to my principles, in the long run, you'll be on my side. And so Cisco, as a commander at basically a backwater, he was basically given an impossible task because they knew he wanted to quit. They knew he was salty. He had lost his wife. Really, he had no more respect for Starfleet. They gave him that post and told him, actually, in the very first episode, Picard told him, short of violating the prime directive, do everything you can to bring Bajor into the Federation. So he was there just to skirt toe the line and help them get it together. And once that was over, they would begin to phase him out because they knew he didn't have any more passion for it. However, once he discovered the wormhole and he got introduced to these entities. Now, like I just said, the wormhole is basically your pineal gland. So he tapped into the outer reaches of himself, and one of the first things that he encountered when he went to the wormhole in Star Trek and Deep Space Nine, one of the first things he encountered, they wanted to know, well, who are you? You know, this is the Cisco, and so they began to he had to confront that darker side of himself. And so again, I just say that for me, Cisco would be my favorite. And even though, yeah, he was black, but I like the fact that this was the very first Star Trek episode where they introduced spirituality. And I don't think it could have been done under anybody else. For those who are well versed in Star Trek, uh, several times in the original Star Trek and in the Next Generation, they attempted to interject spirituality, but those captains and those characters, they weren't ready to deal with it. You know, um, Q, who harassed the Next Generation cast, he was the closest thing to a deity, and so all they could do was classify him as some alien life form that was just more powerful than humans. It was in the Star Trek Deep Space Nine series where they were forced to acknowledge that, because if you think about it, I'm gonna switch reels real quick. If you think about it, in the Deep Space Nine series, originally they called them wormhole entities, which was a very scientific classification, basically to say that it's just another form of life that they weren't familiar with familiar with. So that was uh, that was Benjamin Sisko's, that was his main cross to bear. He became the emissary, and so as emissary, he had a better opportunity of fulfilling his role, his job. He had a better chance of making his job easier if he held this role as emissary. But near the end of that series, I want to say Star Trek Deep Space Nine ran for like 7 years. But near the end of that series, he accepted his role as the emissary, as the prophet, as a spiritual leader. I believe it was in that last season of Deep Space Nine where he actually said, "Hey, I bought a plot of land on Bajor, and this is where I'm retiring to." So he had accepted that uh, not only was he the emissary that he was a spiritual leader, he had accepted and said, "This is where I'm gonna. This is where I will find my end. This is where I belong." And so, in terms of spirituality, we sometimes we tend to resist the truth that's in our face, and so at some point, if you're diligent and if you keep a mind open to wonder and not closed to belief, at some point you will accept your role. You'll say, okay, this is who I am. And so then you find a way to integrate the two. Because Star Trek, again, I just said that the zodiac sign Libra. Come on out, bud. Come on out, sit. Yeah. That's my son. He usually sit in on every interview. Um, Come on out, bud, if you want to come out. And so I just said that the zodiac sign for technology is Libra. So Star Trek is all about balance. And the balance that Star Trek implies is on one hand we have technology, and on the other hand we have humanity, ourselves as beings. You got to see. Oh, you going to sit right there, bud? Okay. And so um, we never saw that full balance until Deep Space Nine, when Cisco was forced to say, "Hey, on one hand, uh, I have this obligation to Star Trek, to Starfleet, but I also have this obligation to my own spirituality." And the beauty of it all, and I'll wrap this up just on the topic of my favorite series. The beauty of it all is that in the last season of Deep Space Nine, he realized that his mother was a goddess, that he was descendant of gods and goddesses, and that it was his destiny to be exactly where he was. And so think about it in terms of our lives. We most of us, most people listening should be familiar with Bobby and Panic, and we gods, we gods, we fallen gods, we the titans. And so a lot of people, the first thing you hear is, well, if you're a god, snap your finger and give me $1,000,000. If you're a god, do XYZ. The thing about it is, anybody that's familiar with mythology and different deities, the gods suffered just as much as the humans. They might have had a lot more power and a lot more options and choices, but they suffered and they went through things. As a matter of fact, you find out from the movies that the gods were just as dependent on humanity as humanity was dependent on the gods. Because what was the movie? The movie where they said, "Don't pray to the gods. You starve them out if you don't give them your attention." And so the beauty of it all is that to realize that not only are you descended from a God, that doesn't preclude or exclude you from the sufferings of material existence, because the mere fact that we exist here on earth, um, it's all polarity and duality. Yes, there's going to be ups and downs. And as a matter of fact, every time you experience an up, somebody else is experiencing a down. The thing about it is to accept it and find ways to integrate it into your everyday life. And that is the part that I feel Panic stressed the most, is that the only way to do this, you have to become a scientist. You have to embrace your inner technology. And the scientist in you is going to say, let's experiment. So if this is working, I'm going to try more of this, less of that. Now, if that experiment doesn't work, then you're going to try more of this, less of that, and then I'm going to add something else. And so you find out what works best for you. And that's what Star Trek is about. And I think that Cisco did the best of embodying the balancing of the material part of existence, the thing that most of us hate. I got to get up, I got to go to work, I got to pay bills, and then the spiritual aspect. And those two usually fall in conflict, because keeping it real, in America, we have the most quote unquote freedoms, but most of us spend the majority of our time dealing with work and things that we can actually monopolize off of all these freedoms. You would think that every American meditated for 4 hours a day and had all these benefits, but truth be told, most of us are locked in a struggle for survival. So I think that from what I just said, if you look at Star Trek Deep Space Nine through that lens, you'll be amazed. And I'll say this, they couldn't have had anybody other than a brother be Benjamin Sisko. because we're talking spirituality, you know. And not to give away too many jewels from my book, but it had to be somebody melanated. And I say that because uh, the universe is made up of what we now know of dark matter and dark energy, two things that we can't see, but we know it affects everything in existence. And so uh, to have a black commander, a black captain embody that dark matter, it couldn't have been anybody other than a brother. And it was perfect casting. You know, a lot of people talk about Hollywood and they have casting and all these things that have to do with spells and rituals, but they did a great job there because it couldn't have been anybody other than that brother to portray that role. And again, it was important that he be a father, that he showed that you can balance work and life and be a good father. And also, a beautiful part about Cisco was that even though he was a father, he didn't shield his son from life. He allowed his son to experience and live life. And so another one of my, I read a lot. And so most people who've been following me for years know that I'm a huge fan of Joseph Campbell, who talks. He has books like The Hero's Journey, and so he talks a lot about mythology. And what you'll find is that in mythology there is for lack of a better term, a stereotype: the mother as the nurturer, the father as the protector. However, the father is also like the father is like I'm trying to think of the word, for lack of a better term, a dad is always a bad guy. The dad is always seen as having his head in the clouds. He's not really present at all times. Uh, uh, a good example you could use with Ganesha. When Ganesha was born, um, oh wow, I just drew a blank. Um, when Ganesha was born, Shiva came home and he saw this child blocking his way to his wife. And so he didn't realize it was his child. And so Ganesha actually chopped off this child's head. So when his wife came and said, "Well, where's our son?" Uh, Shiva scrambled, put an elephant's head on it and said, "Well, here he is." Well, the thing about it is that's one of the sayings about fatherhood, about men. Men are always portrayed mythologically as being half present. I'm a father. I have three children, and I like to think I'm a pretty chill dude. I have my moments. I'm not gonna say I don't yell and fuss and things like that, but overall, I know I'm a fun dad. I laugh more than I yell. I'm not even really a yeller. So I would like for my kids to know that if I raise my voice, it's serious. Otherwise, they know dad's going to talk in the same tone. But the point I'm making is, as a father, I've realized that there's still this ominous presence to you. It's always assumed that dad's going to be mad. And so um, I like the fact that they portrayed this strong black man. And there's a lot of memes where Benjamin Sisko did a whole lot of yelling, but you also knew that he was empathetic, he was caring, he was kind. And so I just think that we all tend to embody these mythologies on some level. And so I actually, and to be honest, I don't think it's a bad analogy about fatherhood, because even if you take the Christian concept, it's God, Father, Mother, children. So God, as a male figure, you have to have your head in the clouds if you're going to commune with God. And even if you think about things like think about every TV series dad. Most TV series dads, they're lightweight, goofy, they're barely present, you know. And I think about like the Al Bundys and the Cliff Huxtables. Dads are either seen as a joke or they're menacing, and they have a straight no on their lips. Whatever you ask dad is going to be a no. And so I just don't want to keep babbling and going on and on, but I just overall the whole concept of the book And what I'm saying now about Cisco is that we got to see these mythologies played out on a microcosmic scale as opposed to a macrocosmic. And so that's what I was saying too before we oh, thank you, she is Moon Feather. You're right, the comeback is incredible. At some point we could talk about that too, uh because Khalil dropped on me today. This is actually a year ago this month. Matter of fact, on the 4th of July, uh my family suffered a fire. And uh I did my best to stay, to be me and to be positive, but it was horrible. We lost just about everything. Matter of fact, I still haven't recovered. I had a huge library. I had over 500 books in my library. I lost the majority of them, and the ones I do have, I'll be honest, it's kind of like trauma. Most of them are still soot stained, uh, and so we can talk about it later. But I just want to say that, just in terms, like, even with Star Trek, and when you deal with these setbacks, um, you have to stay the course. I'm gonna jump real quick. In terms of the fire that my family experienced, and then tied into Star Trek. You would think of something like a Captain Janeway, Star Trek Voyager. She was thrown into a situation where I think they were like 300 light years away from Earth. So like they wouldn't have got home for like 70 plus years. Everybody on that ship would have been dead by the time they made it back. And so when you find yourself in situations that you think are unobtainable, you think that, dude, this is it. I can't bounce back from it. From Star Trek, I learned that no, you stay the course. You stay true to your principles and you stay the course. And if you do that, the shortcuts and the doors are going to open, you know, and and you get to that point through meditation and through applying what you know. And I say meditation because I think that meditation is the one thing that most people are lacking in. A lot of us listen to Bobby, a lot of us, myself included. I'm going to be honest. I used to devour, I got up on Bobby in the late 90s. I used to devour it. Number one, I thought he was funny. Number two, I love the fact that he decoded movies. And I would listen, listen, listen. And I was hoping he would break down some movie that I liked. If he broke down a movie that I had never watched, and I'm going to watch it and I'm going to look for what he dropped. But at some point, I realized, like, I want my own decodes. I want my own downloads. And so that's where, with Bobby and eventually Panic giving us these tools on how to decode movies, decode your dream, and eventually decode your own life. So a lot of times meditation is critical, because if you don't take that time to explore the inner parts of you, you'll find yourself in a situation like in Star Trek where you're kind of lost and you'll just drive around in circles, because life is as we know it. I mentioned Joseph Campbell in The Hero's Journey. You'll find out that life is really a bunch of cycles. And so when I think of life as a cycle, what my visual in my mind, I think of that Mayan calendar that has the huge circle with the smaller circle, then a smaller circle, and all of those circles are turning. So we live our lives in these cycles. The smaller the inner wheel, that's the cycles that repeat the fastest. That's going to work, getting up, paying bills, things like that. Then you have the larger circle, and that's the outer circle, the next one, and that's another cycle that repeats. That might be family and the small decisions that we make. And those small decisions that we make, we don't realize it, but we have an unconscious proclivity. We have an unconscious leaning to kind of make the same decisions. And so, in that smaller circle is spinning, which is on automatic. Then the next one, we're making what we think are decisions and choices, but we're really making the same ones. And then you have the overarching one. And that's the one where you'll look up and 30 years later, you're still doing the same shit. You'll wonder, like, man, nothing has changed. And that's because you don't have the insight or the tools to make those small adjustments. And I really think, for myself, like, even today, Khalil dropped on me, man. This is the 1 year anniversary after the fire when I was last on the show. And so you have to make these micro adjustments, or else you'll find yourself really repeating the same cycles over and over. Another theme that you see in Star Trek, because Star Trek plays with time, they have these time loops where we've seen the episodes. If you watch it, you've seen the episodes where time is looped in on itself and you're living the same day over and over. One of my favorite movies, Groundhog's Day. So if you don't make the micro adjustments, if you don't do the small things, and the only way you can truthfully make a micro adjustment is through meditation. And so, even in the Star Trek universe, there are certain species like the Vulcans. They allot a certain amount of time every day to meditate, and so these are the tools that we have to actually go deeper within, to get that overarching where you look down on your patterns. And once you look down on your patterns, then you can make those micro adjustments. But just to take it all back, and I'm gonna throw it back to you, Cisco and the Deep Space Nine series is my favorite. And actually, in my book, I want to say that's probably the longest chapter that I have, because there were so many jewels in the Deep Space Nine series. We got to see uh Bajoran spirituality, Ferengi spirituality, Klingon spirituality, which uh, we kind of got introduced to the deeper side of the Klingons from the Next Generation, but we didn't get to see the deeper aspects of it until Deep Space Nine. So yeah, though that would be my favorite captain, and I'm gonna say this too, that it was very appropriate for Cisco, because if you notice, he was like a Shakespearean actor. You know, he was very and all Star Trek captains have to have a degree of that melodrama. Kirk was probably the best. Picard was more subdued with it. But all the captains had some aspect of the Shakespearean. But it was Cisco who was very serious. And so watching Cisco, I knew that his serious demeanor was actually a correspondence to the star system Sirius. And so for me, it just for me, that's what resonated and made it perfect. But I'll throw it back to you and we can keep it moving.
Well, thank you for that. We're gonna come right back to Captain Cisco, because there's a lot there. There's a couple things I would love to touch on. I would love to get your opinion on. First and foremost, I want to say love, peace, and power to everybody who is watching, who's joining us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Special shout out to my bestie, my heart, Moonfeather. She has a very interesting question. Um, are the scales considered as the machine in terms of Libra being uh, um, the actual sign of technology?
Okay, the great question. So the simplest answer to that, the scales of Libra are similar to the claws on a crab. So the simplest answer is, are the claws on the crab separate from the crab? No, it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. Um, without the scales, the mechanism or the mechanics of Libra wouldn't work, because it's all on the balance. It's all on a scale of balance. And so you think of that same scale and you take it to the Kemetic mythology of the weighing of the heart. So a heart is weighed against a feather. So you would think automatically nothing could be lighter than a feather, right? But the scale is there to determine that balance. And so for some of us, I'm gonna go in the very mundane sense. For some of us, uh, our scale leans heavily towards, we spend a lot of time on our phones and we neglect our families. So your scale is leaning heavier in that direction. It's going to take something to give you a means of gauging whether you're balanced or not, because it's like the saying. I don't know if most people are familiar with it. It was an old school saying: Would you rather have a ton of bricks or a ton of feathers dropped on you? When I was a kid and I got hit with it, I instantly said ton of feathers, but a ton is a ton. So The balance in this instance, in terms of Libra, the scales are an integral part of the mechanism itself, because the scales is are what is feeding information to say what your particular balance is. And I hope that answered the question.
Most definitely, most definitely. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I want to say love, peace, and power to my cousin Vega. Thank you for joining us. Happy to see you, Cuzzo.
Peace.
Um, so we got to go back to Captain Cisco. You said so much. You touched on so many things, all true and all I completely agree with. There's so much that got introduced in Deep Space Nine. You mentioned the Ferengi spirituality, the Bajoran spirituality. We saw Cisco go through a couple different iterations of love, especially with Jax and Jaxia, as she
Yep.
changed her soul ties and, mental aspects and expanded or perhaps contracted, depending on how you want to look at it. There's some things in the mythology I noticed. I noticed it in other mythologies, and that's always a very big thing to me. You can always find an abundance of that in Star Trek, but in particular, Deep Space Nine. And what I'm speaking about is the idea of scouts or sentinels or informants. Odo was the chief of security, right? Which is interesting because they also had Worf. So at one point you have Worf and Cisco not necessarily vying for the same token of affection or object of affection, but they had both had dealings with these the same entity, which I feel represented a lot because when they finally got the scout shipped, it was named the Defiant. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But Odo, being the chief of security, he was a shapeshifter. And at one point later in the series, he actually finds his home world. Brother Panic taught about this in his class, and it was one of the most profound moments I had because they really give it to you straight. They send out aspects of themselves from the source, this giant ocean.
Uh-huh.
Um, and they go out to retrieve information, and those who make it back and they share what they've learned, and some don't make it back, but they're still a part of the collective. They're just, when we look at the idea of like in the Discovery or in the Eastern philosophy, how we each have our own bubble or we each have our own balloon, our own universe. You see all of that enacted. You see that across the Superman mythology with the Kryptonians. You see that across Jason and the Argonauts. You see that across in the Matrix even. Um, an example you were speaking about earlier with the mother and the father being a bad guy. You can see that in the Terminator. Because the Terminator, when you first see him, of course, he's trying to kill the mother of the Messiah, and then he becomes an echo of himself and becomes a protector. So there's a lot I just gave you. I hope you can do something with that.
No, I can't. I had to come inside because my I was outside enjoying the air, but my laptop was dying. I don't got a plug out there. Hold on one second. I'm gonna turn my camera back on. Yeah, I do actually. I do. And so what I want to say about that first and foremost, one moment. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so dealing with Odo and what you said about Odo and Worf, that's a very profound statement. So now Panic did drop that about Odo. and that was a fabulous correspondence, because Odo represents each of us, that fraction of our soul that descended from. Oh yeah, Worf is an embankment. Thank you for dropping that. She is Moon Feather, because I'm gonna touch on that. That's exactly what I'm gonna say. So Odo represented that sliver of the soul. Odo, as the chief of security, is perfect because he was actually a guardian. He made sure that what was right, and what was wrong, we're gonna consider it wrong. So actually that's the goal of the soul as a gatekeeper, so to speak. But the overarching, that's the backdrop of security. Now, when they introduced Worf, Worf came in as the ego. The ego is that first gatekeeper. The ego is what keeps us from uh, accepting new information. How you could be online on social media, and you could say something that to you is just very simple, and you just make a statement, and somebody is totally offended. How dare you say that? And they're just completely pissed off. Well, that's actually the functioning of their ego, because the ego is what decides what gets passed. What the ego is the gatekeeper, sense of, I'm going to allow this information to come in and be vetted and work its way into our being, or no, I'm rejecting that out the gate. Jesus is real. I'm not listening to Konami codes no more. He said Jesus ain't real. The ego decided that. On a conscious level, you didn't. The ego did. And so what I find to be I don't know the word I'm searching for, but that's why comedy, that's why you can accept more truths through a laugh than in seriousness, because the ego is trained to say, if this is funny, if I think it's funny, I'm gonna drop my guards and I'm gonna laugh. And so that's why comedians, as court gestures and things like that, that's why comedians are allowed to say and judge certain things. Like back in the days, there was a court jester. The court jester was the only person allowed to criticize the king, but it was always delivered in the terms of a joke. And so I think that's why it was important that the character of Worf, and as she is Moonfeather pointed out, a wharf is an embankment. It's a barrier. Well, if you think about it, Worf had no sense of humor. Wasn't nothing getting past him, you know? And so, oh yeah, that's fire. And then and here you say she is Moonfeather just dropped a level quasi to which a shop may be moored. So again, we're dealing with more science. Straight up. And so the whole concept of the shapeshifters, that the malleability of um the soul can take on many different shapes. So some people, if you believe in reincarnation, you'll find some people that say, I've never been a woman, I've only been a man in every one of my reincarnation. That's actually not true, because the soul is like water in that it takes on the shape of the vessel, so it has that shape shifting quality. If you pour water into a square shaped container, it's going to appear to be square. If you drop it into something that's circular, it's going to appear to have a circular shape. And so that is indicative of the soul, and the soul's ability to take on different shapes. And the purpose of that is because just as Odo was sent out from the source to experience, you cannot experience if you're rigid. So if Odo was not a shapeshifter, he would not have that diverse information to bring back to the source. You know what I'm saying? So I look at Odo and Worf as different aspects of our psychology, like the id and the libido and the super ego. So in that instance, Cisco would be the super ego, So that's the main thing I want to point out, is that when you look at these series, is that it is a microcosmic view of our own inner makeup, and just like you said, the mother is seen as the nurturer and things like that. However, if you look at it from the aspect of Kabbalah, the mother is actually the severity. That's the pillar of severity, of justice. And so while we think of our moms ultimately as the nurturer and the person that raised us and this and that, our moms laid down the law. Mom was justice. She was severity, you know. And so uh I actually think that the role of the dad in terms of, like I was saying, the dad is always seen as this ogre. Matter of fact, that's the word that Joseph Campbell uses. He says that the dad is seen as an ogre, and so the dad is seen as, no matter you, as a parent. What I'm realizing, I have an 18-year-old and I have twin daughters that are 15. You cannot spare your children from trauma. That's what they're here for. They're here to transmute. And so, no matter how good of a dad you are, I believe it was Panic who dropped this, you're always going to be guilty of doing too much of one thing or not enough of another. You know, you hugged me too much, or you didn't hug me at all. Even right now, I come home from work, I'm tired. Uh, my daughters, my daughters literally called a family meeting about a month ago and said, "Dad's not present. He's here, but he's not present." And so I'll be honest and say that initially I was like Tupac. I reject your deposit. You know what you mean? But I had to actually check my ego and get with myself and say, "You're right. I'm really not present." You know, I get off work and I'm more or less like Al Bundy. I want to sit in front of TV with my hands in my pants, right? So some of these stereotypes, they exist for a reason. It's like miniature obstacles that we all have to overcome, you know. And I'm trying to think of another point that you brought up in terms of the other third point you brought up, and I can't think of it now. But I just want to say that in terms of Odo, and that was such a profoundly beautiful subplot to Deep Space Nine, was Odo, because in the end, Odo got what he always wanted, which was to be human, to be a solid. And when he got it, not only was it a culture shock, but he wanted to go back to his original state. He wanted the opportunity to be able to go back to the source. And so I'll say this too, for those who acknowledge reincarnation, because it's real, whether you acknowledge it or not, it's real. It's said that we have, I think it's 12 reincarnations in each zodiac. So like 144 reincarnations in each zodiac. And then that can extend even further, because you might have a combination. You know, that's why we got the different houses and the different nodes. So you might come back in a combination of a certain zodiac sign, and you get so many. Now, the common belief is that after so many reincarnations, the slate gets wiped clean. Uh, all of the experience you might have gained, all of the karma you might have burned or gained, it gets wiped clean, and you come back brand new to experience. And I actually think, just to kind of go on a tangent from the topic, I actually think that's what we're seeing now. I can remember, I'm 51. I can remember being younger, and when kids were born, it was always said, "Oh, that baby been here before," you know. And so you look now, and my personal opinion is I see a lot of new souls. I say new, not in the sense that the source is creating more, but these are people who've completed all of their cycles, and either they're back here to experience it all over again, or they're here to help those of us who are still working to gain that ultimate enlightenment. So a lot of the knots that we have on Gen Z, you know, this new generation, I don't have any of them, because I look at this new generation, and the things that I accept as natural, they reject out of hand. And I think that's what they're there. That's what they're here for. They've rejected all of the things that have became normal, the things that we've normalized. They reject it. They have no past lifetime memories of conforming to any of it. And to be truthful, I think that's where the fear of AI comes in at, because those of us who do have these old souls, we remember when technology was more organic as opposed to being mechanical. But this new generation, they look at technology as an extension of who they are. They have no fear of AI. They have no fear of AI taking their job because they don't want a job. You know what I'm saying? And so, me personally, I have no fear of technology. Um, I recently found out in my personal life that, like I said, my mom was a Libra. My best friend growing up was a Libra. My wife is a Libra. My daughters are Aries. Aries are the counterbalance to Libra. So I look at my life and I understand why I do have a love and an affinity for technology. You know, and I say this, I joke all the time with my kids. Growing up, I had to set the VCR for my mom every day because for some reason it was always blinking 12. And my kids now come to me about questions about technology because I've chosen to surround myself with Libras. To be truthful, Libras and Leos. Even though my daughter's an Aries and my son is a Gemini, but I've chosen to embrace these two aspects of within me. And actually, I recently, Khalil, you dropped it, I believe, Zodakai's L, the Morris sister. She dropped that, the zodiac sign we're born in, that is to teach our parents. So my mom was a Libra, and her technology was 8 tracks and cassette tapes. She was not ready for VCRs and CD players and things like that. But it was my job to teach her that, hey, life ain't gonna change. Technology is gonna continue to evolve, but let's get this money though. Let's get our paper. That's what I was here to teach her. And so I look back and I say, and at the same time, she gave me that Libra aspect of her because, and this is funny to me, because I was just talking about cycles within cycles. So recently, I realized one of my overarching cycles. At a very young age, I'm gonna say I was about 8 or 9. I had an uncle who I hung the sun and moon and stars on everything he said. And so what he told me was at a young age, he said, Mike, you want to get a job where you're a mechanic, a doctor, in construction. You want to get a job that's something that people are always going to need. And so that overrode everything my mother ever said, because my mother told me, Mike, you're going to work with your mind, not with your hands. You're not going to be a mechanic. You're not going to do manual labor, none of that. Well, I tuned my mom out. To this day, I'm a laborer. But I just realized this overarching cycle. I was finally gifted the ability to look down on my life and realize that, man, I don't want to be a laborer. I want to work with my mind. And so, yeah, it took 40 plus years for me to realize it. But the point I'm making is that we we come into this world rational and intelligent beings, and we still allow emotions to kind of cloud our vision. And so it's really more of a matter of us being honest and being to let go of the baggage. You know, we carry these things around, and to be truthful, what I just dropped about my uncle telling me versus my mom, I say that because everybody I work with say, Mike, why are you here? You shouldn't be here, Mike. You're too smart. You shouldn't be doing what you're doing here, Mike. And I had a nephew that recently, well, not recently, but some years ago, he told me, he said, mind you, my nephew is way younger than me. He's about 20 years younger than me. He told me, man, Uncle, I'm going to tell you why you have problems at work. And I'm like, I'm listening now. I'm like, huh? He said, because the problem is, he said, you walk around your job in a spacesuit. And I'm looking like, I don't understand what you're talking about. So what he's talking about is, what he broke down was, I walk around like one of the astronauts from NASA. I got the helmet on. I got the backpack for my oxygen. I got the tubes going everywhere. I got this big old suit, and I'm walking around on Earth. And he said, that's actually offensive to everybody around me. because they're wondering, what is this dude doing here? He's supposed to be in outer space somewhere. And so we learn these lessons when we're supposed to learn them, you know. So I find myself still ever changing, ever evolving. And I spoke briefly about meditation. That's what meditation will do for you. If you, and I'm a huge proponent of journaling. Whether you do it in physical writing, there's something about writing that's, I'm pretty sure, goes back to Tahuti, where if you write it down, you're spelling and it has more power. But if you just use your phone, if you have a notebook app, when you wake up in the morning, write down what you remember about your dreams. After you meditate, write down what you recall, the feelings, the smells, the sights, all five senses. And what you'll find is that when you reflect back, when you go back and you look over it, you'll start to see that common thread. And so it's going to be different for each of us. And even when you notice a common thread, you'll go back years later, look again, and you'll notice an even more overarching theme, or you'll notice something more intricate. So I'm a huge proponent of documenting. And I think that that is the role that social media plays for most of us now, because most of us are against journaling. We don't want to journal, you know, but we actually are journaling on social media. Every day every day on Facebook, you can find out, you can find out what you posted a year ago, 2 years ago, 7 years ago, 12 years ago, 15 years ago. It's a form of journaling. And Khalil had actually dropped it before we went on live that today was the 1 year anniversary from the last time I was on this platform. And so that's a form of journaling, because journaling is a form of mental time travel. And I'm going to tie it back into the topic at hand, which is my book on Star Trek. Star Trek deals heavily with time travel. Now, Panic put me up on this, but I did my own research. And so time travel, mental time travel, is called chronesthesia. So the beauty of chronesthesia, mental time travel, is that you can actually go back in time and you can change things. And so, you know, the ultimate paradox with time travel, I think it's called the grandfather paradox. You know, you go back, the butterfly effect, you step on a blade of grass, you change the whole future. So that's always in movies, that's like a bad thing. The thing is, you can go in with surgical precision, change something in mental time travel. You can do it in meditation. You can do it in the dream. You go back and you change something, and you can alter your reality right now. I've read studies where science is actually postulating, they're at the belief right now that we actually live our lives in reverse. So what we consider the past is actually our future. What we consider the future is actually our past. So by going in mental time travel and changing your past, that's how you affect your present and what we consider the future. And we see it all the time in Star Trek. You know, you go back and sometimes it's about getting back to the correct timeline. That's mental time travel, where you go back and say, you know what, at this point I turned left when I should have turned right. And you can go back, and through meditation, you can make those micro adjustments. Because that's what I really think it's about. I think that ultimately, what every Star Trek series has been about is about staying true to your principles and making micro adjustments. Now, you don't have to go back in the past. If you know how to deal with your different traumas, if you know how to balance your own mental health, you can make those adjustments in the now. It's just that in the now, the micro adjustments might not work. You might have to go a little harder. You might have to make some major adjustments. But even in that, it's going to require a degree of faith. And the only way you can make a decision in faith without regret or second guessing is to become the knower. You become the knower through meditation, knowledge of self, and then stay in the course. Again, back to what we're talking about with Star Trek. At some point, you got to stay the course. If you make a decision and say, as a scientist, I'm going to do XYZ, you stay the course. Yeah, it's going to get bumpy. Your shields are going to drop to 3%. All the things that are going to happen. And, I dropped this in my book. We don't realize it when we're watching Star Trek because in the very first episode of The Next Generation, they mentioned that they got a report from the metaphysical department. So Star Trek very much acknowledges the metaphysical. So your shields, anybody that's read Dion Fortune's Psychic Self-Defense, that's your shields. Your shields weaken and they weaken. You find ways to strengthen them. And most of us, we go into meditation. We attempt astral travel and things like that with no spiritual protections. I don't know for everybody else, but for myself, when I first got heavy into my meditations, the first thing I instinctually did was build different. I built up different forms of spiritual protections. Whether it was what appeared to be armor or whatever, but you build up different forms of spiritual protections, and all of that is critical. And shows like Star Trek, that's what it demonstrates. If you go all the way back to, it wasn't in chronological order, but Star Trek Enterprise, which was the first ship to venture out into space, man, they had hardly any shields. They didn't have any protocols. They didn't have any prime directive. They were scared to use the transporters, and one thing I do point out in my book is that if you do watch Star Trek on a metaphysical level, if you go back to the Star Trek Enterprise with Captain Archer, their warp core was horizontal. Now, all the other variations of Star Trek, warp cores were vertical. Warp core is just your spine. So in that first Star Trek, they were on a dead level because the only time your spine is horizontal is when you're laying in a grave. However, they had designs to raise themselves up to a higher level, to get perpendicular, to get to a living level and higher. And so we saw that from that version, they evolved, and then the warp core went vertical, which is to say that I'm not on a dead level. You know what I'm saying? I'm not laying down on the grid. This is not a undead or unconscious thinking reaction versus action and things like that. So I'll keep babbling. Jump in, Khalil, and we can kind of keep it on track if you got another question.
Man, I'm over here losing my fucking mind, yo. Like this is number one. You dropping it. You really dropping. I wouldn't dream of cutting your wisdom, but I'm going through my mind, and I'm going back to yesterday. Love, peace, and power to Dr. Aleem El Bay, who joined me yesterday. We were talking about this in a roundabout way. We were talking about Kundalini, how it resides in the coccyx or the tailbone, and of course it's meant to be channeled through to the skull, both of which are the hardest and densest bones in the body, right? So you can understand why salat or why prayer or prostration can be so crucial to the idea of Kundalini rising. But if we go back further than that, and I'm thinking about, I think it was the second Star Trek movie where they had the whales? Was it the second one or the first?
That was the second or the third. Actually, I speak on that in my book too, the one with the whales. But go ahead.
Well, we know how important sea life is. We know how ancient that actually is, especially in terms of whales and dolphins. They begin to show you that in that movie, but we were the Nomo. We were the Dagon. We were the ones who were up under the water. So essentially, our spines were vertical. Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? As opposed to being horizontal when we came upon the land to deal with our own individual water, as opposed to being in our own spiritual amniotic fluid, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So actually, I say this. So now, you have to realize this. We are the Nomo. But when you're dealing with water has the same essence as space. It is not landlocked. Space in water, there is no up and down. If you were to go out, well, I won't say there is no up and down, but it's easy to get disoriented in water. You can hear, there's been stories of people who have been deep in the ocean, and the only way they knew up from down is the bubbles coming out of their mouth. So in water, when we were in the water, that's the same as being in space. So like the one thing that Star Trek kind of fools people on is that whenever two ships meet, they're always facing the same direction. One's not upside down. There's always that level. And so Star Trek explains it, that every ship has like a little beacon that says how to orient yourself. But when we were the Nomo, that was just like being in outer space. It was infinite. And so what I liked about that Star Trek series, because I actually broke that down. I told you before we started that I wanted to speak strictly on the series. Magic LaCroix, exactly. The waters above, the waters below. Our oceans are a microcosmic reflection of space. And in space, there is no up or down. And so in that series with the whales, that was our story. That was the Dogon story. That was Nibiru returning from Sirius and checking up, like, man, how y'all treating our peoples down here? And if you think about that movie, they went crazy when they found out you killed off all the people we seated here. You killed them all. They went ham on Earth, and Kirk had to bring some back. Like, nah, we didn't kill them all. Gyroscope. Yes, she is Moonfeather. So the point I want to make is that in the most literal sense, what that Star Trek Enterprise showed by them having their warp core horizontal, if you think about it, the Vulcans kept saying, y'all ain't ready to go into space. Y'all not ready. That was the main thing they kept saying. And the reason why they were saying it on a metaphysical level is subconsciously, unconsciously, you're dead. You're horizontal. You're basically, you're in the grave. Your mentality is not ready to step out into this great beyond. And so to tie that back into what we were talking about with meditation, some people dive into meditation and get scared right back out. And that happens because, I don't know if it happens for everybody, but definitely happened to me. When you first go into meditation, you see some things, you hear some stuff, it's going to scare you. For some people, it scares them right back to church or whatever their safety net is. It'll take you right back to it. And so what you have to realize is that you have to get out of that mindset, because that is one of the things that we saw in that Star Trek Enterprise. When mankind first ventured into space, they weren't as tolerant of other societies and cultures and alien species. And again, I dropped it earlier. The aliens in Star Trek, there are no aliens. The only aliens are when you have a divergent thought and you think, we've all sat there and maybe thought of, and I won't say all, I'm gonna blame it on me. I've said and thought about gunning down a room of people, driving your car and running people off the road. We all have these thoughts, and you think that's alien, but no, it's an aspect of you that you should integrate and work with it, understand why you had that thought. And so that's why when the humans first met the Vulcans, they were alien. The humans didn't like them. They're holding us back. Then once we realized that the Vulcans just like us, the Klingons came along. Man, ain't nothing like us, this and that. And then it was Spock who pointed out humanity is a brutal race, just like the Klingons. You guys should get along very well. So I think that when we come into these situations in terms of meditation, where you experience something and you find it alien, you're better off embracing it. Matter of fact, I'll share something. I've shared it before. I was in meditation and I was going down like a street. It was dark at night. And I looked to my right down an alley and I saw something like a vampire, like Bram Stoker's type Dracula. Wrinkled, pale, gray skin. The head was almost conical. It was kind of hideous, right? So when I looked, what made me look was I heard like a slurping and like somebody was eating something, like some sloppy watermelon eating or something. It was just slurps and bites and gurgles. And I looked, and that it looked like it was eating like a baby or something. I was like, what is that? And so a part of me was like, don't look, just keep walking, and get past that. Well, next thing I knew, it was right there, and it was almost like you could smell the breath and you could experience it. And so, no, they can't, but they can hear you, baby. So what I did in the moment was I just said, hey, I love you. And it diffused the entire situation, which is similar to like what I'm saying in my book of Star Trek, is that you don't have enemies. It's just it's just an aspect of yourself that you might not know, might not be familiar with, or not ready to reconcile with. Go ahead, you can ask me another question.
Maybe you want to stay here.
I'm going to try to wrap up. There was another point I wanted to mention. You just dropped so much, man. About Captain Benjamin Sisko. If we compare a man called Hulk with the entirety of Deep Space Nine, what we actually witnessed was apotheosis, right? A man called Hulk had 1 season and 13 episodes. 13 is that Messiah energy. That's that Christ energy. That's what brings you to the center. But when you break it down and when you reduce it, it's also 4, which is the foundational energy. It's the algorithm itself. It's the actual spiritual hard work, right? When we look at Deep Space Nine, it had 176 episodes, which reduces to 5, which is the heart. There's only 9 numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the center, 6, 7, 8, 9. All coming from the divine portal, which of course it was next to. But that was across 7 seasons. It was a mirror of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which had 178 episodes, which reduces to 7 across 7 seasons. So now we're talking about strictly a 7 major chakra series evolution. When you look at Star Trek Voyager, which was the first time we saw a female captain, and I'll never forget the flack at the time. From certain Star Trek fans and certain kinds of people who just didn't want to see a woman in that position. But interestingly enough, Star Trek Voyager had 176 episodes, which 172, which reduces to 10, which reduces to 1, which is all about leadership. And when you understand some of the spiritual aspects of Star Trek Voyager, the divine feminine, how long the woman has had to go away from her throne while other people were in its place, and the return to that, I think Voyager represented that to a large degree, especially in terms of the marriage of Starfleet with it wasn't the Bajorans, it was they had to merge with Captain
the Maquis. The Maquis.
Exactly. They had to, and Star Trek has always been about this merger of ideas, this amalgamation. I wanted to touch on that numerology just a little bit because I noticed earlier. Shout out to Visa over at Culturally Speaking. When she had her live earlier, I noticed that there were 6 original Star Trek films, and there were 4 from The Next Generation. That's 64. She was doing a live about the 64 Keys of Enoch, right? Mm-hmm. So no matter where you look, you can see some of these things. I wanted to get your opinion on Sto-vo-kor. Sto-vo-kor is it's essentially, for anybody who's familiar with Norse mythology, it's like Valhalla. It's where warriors can go so they can receive training. Something else Panic spoke about in his class, Rise and Power, was how Khalid Muhammad was not a very spiritual person. He was very much about the 3D, very much about what he could see. And in order for him to get that training once he died, he went into, we have legions in our pineal gland, 72 legions, where we can go to be taught. And you see this across mythology, especially see it across tribalism, different cultures who have a place, no matter what we call it, where we can always go and receive help. You see this reiterated in Hogwarts, where Dumbledore will say things like, "There will always be help for those who require help," in Gryffindor, and all that kinds of shit. You can see where that comes from, especially with the idea of looking forward or looking into the future, boldly going where we've never gone before.
Okay, great point. So I want to speak on Stovercore. What people may not have realized about the Klingon mythology and afterlife. At the core of Stovercore, that's where the honored dead go. There's also a place for the dishonored dead, but Stovercore is where you go as the honored dead. Like you said, it's very similar to Valhalla. But what most didn't realize was that at the core of their mythology, when their deities created the first man and woman together, they went into the realms and they destroyed their gods. And so I'll be honest with you, I meditated on that fact, and I realized that implied that Vulcans, they did the ultimate invocation. There was no longer a need for God or a deity to exist outside of themselves. They literally deified themselves, and they became the living embodiment of their deities. And so, for me, whenever I think of Stovercore, and it has aspects of Valhalla. There's also a barge for the dead. So it has that Greek and Roman aspect also. But what struck me the hardest was the fact that they destroyed their gods. They became the gods. And that's the same message of Panic and Bobby, is to realize that you are the God, to realize that Heru, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, whoever, they're not sitting up on a cloud somewhere. They're embodied within you. And so for some to hear that you destroyed or killed your God, that may sound harsh or even atheistic. But if we interject the scientific aspect, which says that matter and energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed. Well, transformed into what? Into me, into my current embodiment. So for me, that's the main takeaway that I got from the Klingon belief. So in a lot of ways, the lifestyle they live as warriors, where you would think that as warriors, and Klingons are xenophobic. They don't like any other race. They're xenophobics, but yet they still explore, even if it's only to conquer. So you can say in one aspect that Klingons are not afraid of their own mind. They're willing to explore, conquer, and subdue. So that's my main takeaway on the Klingons and Stovercore.
Thank you for that. Excuse me. Thank you for that. Yeah, man. It's profound when you look at it, especially coming from some of the origins of the Klingons. Going into finally seeing them be able to, or some of them being able to work with Starfleet, seeing
Yeah.
that amalgamation. Um, One of the last points I would love to get your opinion on. Um, I know you said your book is primarily going to focus on the series. Um, in terms of the movies, I would love to know what were some of your standouts or what were some of your favorites. My personal favorite was Star Trek Generations, um, because what they show you, um, Number one was Guinan. Guinan was a character played by Whoopi Goldberg, who was
Mhm.
this. She was essentially a sibyl. She was an oracle and a bartender. And she was someone that Captain Picard would always reside in. You know, anytime he had a question or he was kind of going back and forth in his mind, he would always kind of talk to her, which I thought was profound. Um, she was the one who was able to kind of help free him from the Nexus in Star Trek Generations. The Nexus was essentially like it was like the Matrix. It was like the sweetest, greatest thing you had ever tasted.
Mhm.
Imagine being born into a wonderfully wealthy, famous family or powerful family where you want for nothing and just the world is your oyster. Um, that may not necessarily even be close enough, but something along those lines. Um, he had to free Captain Kirk from the Nexus because he was at a point where he was actually reliving the same day. What that implies in terms of incarnation, in terms of some of us when we make the transition and we don't know it because we're stuck in our own fantasy. You see
Mhm.
this in movies like The Discovery, on which is a Netflix film for anyone who hasn't seen it, or the Lovely Bones. Can you
Mhm.
speak to that at all? I'm sorry. Also, of course, with what may be your favorite movie.
Okay. I'll say this on the topic of what you addressed in terms of like the nexus. Um, we came here to experience. You know, um, Panic was big on saying "fuck humanity," which is something that uh, it was a necessary message to wake people up from living in the nexus, from from experiencing a life that they thought was the best life. You know, some ups, some downs, but mostly ups. And I thank God that I woke up today. That kind of thought. But the truth of the matter is, every time every time a man ejaculates, there's millions of sperm, millions. Now let's take that to let's look at it from a different level. Millions of souls are rushing to get here. Whether it's one more chance to get it right, whether it's another chance just to experience, millions of souls are vying for every time a man put one in a sock or flushed it down the toilet. Millions of souls were rushing. Now some were smart and said, I'm a hop on this train because it won't be a reincarnation. He just getting a little head right now. I got to worry about coming back. But the truth of the matter is, uh, there is something truly divine about this human experience. Now, the thing is, and this is what intrigues me the most, is that because I said before, I believe in reincarnation. So there is some aspect, an agreement, kind of like what we said about Odo, where you're going to get sent back here with no memory. And we're going to see if you can still find your way home, if you can still be about your father's work, right? And so there's that aspect of the nexus type reality where you can come here and forget what you came here to do. And so in that instance from that movie, that's what Picard was doing for Kirk, because Kirk had got caught up, and even though he knew that life was dualistic and it had ups and downs, happy times and good times, he was living out his best life. And so when I watched the Nexus, that was the thought that I had. That you know what? Matter of fact, C. Freeman L. said in one of his lectures that if he actually used this term out, he said the devil ain't bothering you. That means that God done forgot about you. You know, if you're not experiencing, because we came here to evolve, to experience. And so if you're not evolving, if your life is just static, if it's just on a plane, if it's on a dead level, uh, you know, you should wonder, or maybe not. Because I do have another theory that, to be truthful, those of us who consider ourselves to be woke, there's a possibility that everybody else we consider dead, they already did their work and they here just to provide you with obstacles to make sure that you continue to evolve. And That's one of those mental puzzles that I wrestle with, because it is a real possibility that all the people we're trying to wake up, they probably already did the work. And then truthfully, they're just here uh, helping you do your work. And that actually changes the dynamic. That goes from you being special and being the one to wake everybody up to you being the one that there's actually 7 billion people on the planet helping you to wake and providing you with obstacles so you can evolve and return to the source. But I'll say, in terms of my favorite movies, I think the one with the whales is probably my favorite. And I broke that one down in my book. I did a brief Magic Croy, evolve while, yep. And so that's the purpose. You evolve while you in the incarnation. Because once we leave this fleshly body, when we're in the ethers, now it all come back to you. And you can see what you got right, what you didn't get right. Because a major part of what we do is you come here with no knowledge of the before. So your first goal is to try to pull back what you can from those previous lives and get to work. So yeah, brother, I apologize. I gotta my wife is looking at me funny. I gotta get moving. We got a family function I'm supposed to be getting ready for.
Brother, you have been an absolute joy and wonderful, wonderful build as always. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to your book. We have to do this again much sooner than a year.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
definitely, definitely.
By all means, please, by all means, go and deal with the family, join the family. Thank them for allowing you to join us today. Thank you again. I cannot thank you enough. Um, Give us the name and title of your book, which is coming out this week, next week.
This week, books to be in the mail. That's all I'm waiting on now is for me to get them in my hand. I got those who pre-ordered. I got everything labeled up and ready to go. So books should be mailed out by Tuesday. To Tuesday, that's the 23rd. Name of the book is The Metaphysics of Star Trek. It's customs, culture, and technologies. It's $18. Real good book. A lot of information packed into it. You can follow me on Facebook, Michael Bell. I try to keep my face up, so if you do stumble across me, you'll see that it's that Michael Bell. On Instagram, it's I am who I think I am. If you want to purchase a book, because I've written 3 books. Well, I co-authored one with my son. I wrote 2, and I've published a total of 5 books. You can go to my website, pillarbookpublishing.com, and purchase you a copy. And I appreciate all the support. Everybody that tapped in today, I appreciate you. This is an awesome build. I've never gotten down with you, Khalil, and we didn't have a dope build. So I just thank you for the platform.
It is my absolute honor, sir. You know, at any time I'll be in contact with you soon, so we can work this out again much sooner. But you go enjoy the family. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I cannot wait for your book.
All right, thank you, sir. I appreciate you and everybody that tapped in. Shay, you know, it's our turn. I just want to say this in party. Most of the people that we consider to be master teachers, they've transitioned. It's our turn. You know, I've been rocking in these circles, Facebook, you know, things like that. It's our turn. All of us, we got the knowledge. Don't be ashamed to let it out. And I just want to say too, what something I did say about the divinity of being human. Yes, you don't want to get caught up in the illusion of being human, but there's something divine to it too. Man, enjoy your humanity as well. That's what we're here for. It ain't all just the work. So thank you, everybody. Let's continue to build. You come to Facebook, Instagram. Oh, my YouTube is Occult Topics with the Professor. We can build whenever, however. I'm always down, whether it's through a joke or dropping something serious.
Thank you for that, everybody. Y'all heard the professor. You can find his link for his book and his website also on my link tree. So have no fear. We will be doing this again very soon. Thank you, everybody who has joined me today. Moon Feather Magic, Sherry, everybody in the chat, everybody on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and comment. And we will see you again very soon. Love, peace, and power. Love, peace, and power to you and the family, Mike. Thank you.
Peace.